Is your vehicle stopping like it should? Does it squeal or grind when you brake? Don't miss out on summer brake deals at O'Reilly Auto Parts.
O'Reilly Auto Parts.
You are listening to the Archaeology Podcast Network.
Ancient tools and burials, plants and seeds, Neanderthals. All these things we make no apology are the study of archaeology. But we don't do dinosaurs, no we don't do...
Welcome to the Archaeological Fantasies Podcast, episode 54. I'm your host, Sarah, with my co-host today, Jeb Card. And today we're interviewing David Anderson, Jeb Card's co-editor on their upcoming book, Lost City, Found Pyramid. We talked to David today about a variety of topics, including his recent visit to the Theosophical Society of America's recent convention. Get ready to think critically.
You will see are a staple of archaeology. But we don't do dinosaurs. No, we don't do dinosaurs. No, we don't do dinosaurs.
Hey everyone, and welcome to the Archaeological Fantasies Podcast. I am your host, Sarah, and I am here today with Jeb Card. How's it going?
It is the beginning of the school year, and that is all I will say.
Is that present?
No, it's a good thing. I am looking forward to seeing the students. Summer is when we kind of retreat and we do things and we construct, and I'm going to be teaching an introduction to archaeology method and theory for the first time in about a year and a half. That's going to be fantastic. So it's a good thing, but it's coming back. It's coming back from summer. So a little stressful, but in a good way. Like in a things need to get done, but they're good things. Not, oh my God, this is awful, but like, oh, this is really great, but oh, it's time to like ramp up now.
And today we have a special guest with us. It is David Anderson, who is your co-editor in your book, is he not?
Yes, David and I edited Lost City, Found Pyramid, Understanding Alternative Archaeologies and Pseudoscientific Practices, and it's available on, by the time this is out, it will be available on Amazon, and you have heard a number of the authors in this, a number of the contributors, so people like Stacey Dunn, April Besaw, our co-host Ken Fader, Chris Begley, have we had any? I think we're going to have James Beal, and we'll talk about that at another time. But yeah, we've been kind of wandering through, and I thought this would be a perfect opportunity to bring David on, because David's also working with these sorts of topics, and he's kind of like working up some ideas and projects, and I wanted to talk to him about that.
So, hey, David, how's it going?
Great. Great to be with both of you guys.
Can you tell us a little bit? Oh, sorry.
I will second Jeb on the whole. It is, the school here is about to start, so everything's getting a little twitchy.
Oh yeah.
Can you tell us a little bit about what you do and why you're on our show?
Sure. So, in that more traditional sense, my background is as a Mesoamerican archaeologist. I've been working in particular in Yucatan, Mexico, since I first went down there as an undergrad in 1999.
We both went to grad school together at Tulane, which is big on that part of the world.
Yes, yeah. Jeb and I got to know each other in good old New Orleans at Tulane University. All the wonderful, fine folks there, and Tulane, to their good credit, God love Will Andrews, our advisor there. Did their best to beat any of this sort of discussion of pseudoarchaeology out of us, because we shouldn't be talking about this stuff.
And yet we are here.
Here we are. Yes, Will rolls his eyes every once in a while, but we love it.
Well, not as much as he used to. He's kind of seen what we're getting at.
That's true. That is very true.
But anyway, so you're a Maya archaeologist.
Yeah, so I'm a Maya archaeologist, and I particularly work with pre-classic Maya and sort of I am very interested in socio-political development. I love chiefdoms as much as it might be an unpopular word.
Now, what does pre-classic mean? And you might rope in that chiefdom thing you just mentioned.
Yeah. So, the classic period is when we get sort of most of the big giant Maya cities that an average person might have seen, or the art that you might have seen before But the classic period doesn't really get started until sort of 200 AD and doesn't really get going until about 600 AD. When you go earlier, we have things that appear to be Maya as early as 1000 or 1200 BCE, and so this is broadly speaking before 200 AD. We look at it as the pre-classic period. You could say this is basically the pre-state period. We don't have complex bureaucratic government fully entrenched yet in the Maya region. On that very early end, in sort of 1000 BC. All that we have are a few small houses, but they make pottery that looks a heck of a lot like the Maya people who come along after them.
Yeah. And there are some places that get kind of complex. I'm thinking like the Mirador Basin, but
sure.
as you're saying, a lot of the peninsula, and you work in the northern part, so like you work in Mexico and like in the state of Yucatan.
Yeah, no, I've spent all my time in Yucatan, Mexico, working specifically with middle pre-classic settlement.
So it's like 500 BCE, more or less.
Yeah. The site I did my dissertation on was called Shtobo, which was one of the largest political centers in the region at right about, I would say, 500 BCE.
Like pyramids? Pyramids?
Yes, by largest political center, it's still don't get too carried away with imagination. There was probably about 1,500 to 2,000 people. The site's about a square kilometer. But it has a beautiful plaza at the center with two pyramids that are about 8 meters tall. From that plaza, we have multiple sock bays, which are raised causeways or little raised roads that the Maya would build that go directly from the plaza out to other buildings within the site. It's a very well organized little site, and it has a beautiful ball court right alongside that main plaza.
Hey, if you got pyramids, I consider that a win.
Yeah, no, I mean, this is a very real Maya site. It looks exactly like what you would expect. It's just kind of small.
All right. Now, so everything you're talking about is all like science and respectable and awesome understanding about the past. And Sarah asked, well, why the hell are you on our show?
What's your dirty little secret here, David?
My dirty little secret is the only reason I, got into archaeology at all is when I was 18, I read Graham Hancock's Fingerprints of the Gods.
So that's a great book. It really is.
Oh, it was a gateway drug. I'd had a little bit of anthropology in high school, and I picked that book up sort of the summer I was going to college, and I was going to college not knowing at all what I wanted to do with myself. And I read that book, and I was hooked. I thought it was amazing, and that I started college. Jeb will find this funny. I'm not sure if he knows. My first semester in college was as a business major.
Jesus Christ!
All respect to business majors. My father was one. My dad.
I respect them. I respect them, but they're not that is definitely a different tribe than myself.
Yeah, not where I should have been. But this.
Well, I don't know.
Hancock's book got that very next that spring semester, my first spring semester, I started transitioning over, and I took an Egyptology class with Douglas Brewer and a bunch of other sort of intro to anthropology and archaeology classes. And I was still hooked and fascinated, but Graham Hancock's book was just started to crumble as I started taking these classes. All of his arguments just started to fall onto the floor in front of me. And I quickly realized that it just didn't hold together as an argument very well. And so, it kind of drifted away from me for a long time, especially as I said, you go on to grad school and they drill you in and they want you to be a good, straightforward scientist as much as possible. And I left this stuff to a certain extent behind me. But as I started to transition around and to the other side of the classroom and start teaching, as I spoke more and more with students, especially in those 101 classes when, students are just passing through and checking a box and don't know why they're in your class. What they do know is this stuff. They know the crazy stuff. They've heard Atlantis. They want to talk about that. They've heard about ancient aliens. They want to talk about that. They get really bored really fast when I start trying to explain, pre-classic Maya socio-political organization.
Yeah. And although we've talked about, we did an episode on the Lost Continent of Mu where we went to grad school, has a big history with a lot of those things, and they don't talk about it but it's there.
Well, I think that's why you in particular have seen a lot of this, and you and I have talked about it a lot. There's the further back you go in time, the more so-called professional archaeologists were deeply involved in this stuff.
Yeah, I mean it's the sort of the birth pangs of the profession. And the thing is and this is an argument I increasingly make, I really think it's not gone. And more importantly, you said people in intro, that idea very much informs what they think about what we do. And I think it has to be dealt with. Now, so you mentioned the pre-classic and these other things. And so you were interested because of where you had come from and reading Graham Hancock. But the thing that drew you back in, as much as I generally like to get people in trouble, was not me. It was something else. And it was a particular thing kind of with the time period you were interested in that sort of dragged you into like, I'm going to talk about these things again.
Well, I think I know a little bit of what you're getting at. Certainly what I ended up writing about for our book, The Lost City Found Pyramid book, and has been on my radar for a long time, is the alleged connection between the Olmec and sort of Western Africa.
Nice. Now, David, can you explain who the Olmec or the Olmec are exactly? We've touched on them in the past, but we've never really focused on them real well.
And I don't think we're going to spend a massive amount of time on the Afrocentric thing because there's a whole
we've talked
episode.
about Afrocentrism, but we haven't really talked about the Olmec.
Yeah, why don't you go ahead and do that?
Yeah, so the Olmec are often referred to as the first civilization in Mesoamerica. They lived along the Gulf Coast of southern Mexico, and they are amazing. If you've seen anything, you have seen their colossal heads. They've carved these giant stone heads that were sort of effigy portraits of their rulers out of basalt. The heads show up in pseudo-archaeological literature every once in a while as the classic trope of how on earth could someone have moved a rock that big? But they did it all the time and whatnot. But the Olmec, date to the middle pre-classic period. So they date to more or less the exact same time as I'm working in Yucatan. A little older, the earliest Olmec sites date back to, they start getting big around 1000 BC. But
I have a question, actually, weirdly enough. So, and this might get a little more specialist, but I'll try not. So you're talking about the Gulf Coast, and the word Olmec, by the way, for our listeners, is a later Aztec word that means people of rubber, and it's basically referring to the later people there. Now, these big friggin' heads are sort of the way of showing power, as well as the altars, and again, we can talk about that if you want. But the Maya equivalent of this in the highlands, in the southern highlands, like southern Guatemala, El Salvador, Honduras, etc., are the potbellies.
Right.
Is there anything like that in Yucatan?
No.
So is there any kind of like, we made a big thing that looks like a person or anything else?
Nope.
Okay.
It's really funny. Working in middle pre-classic Yucatan is I love it. I love the sites that I've worked at. There are very cool things going on there archaeologically, but they were aesthetically limited group of people.
Minimalist.
They don't decorate their pottery. They don't seem to have decorated their buildings. They weren't carving anything.
Why do you think they were so? Why do you think they were so aesthetic?
Why they lack it, or?
Yeah. Why did they not develop it, or did they choose not to use it?
There are good signs that Yucatan is interacting with the Gulf Coast. We definitely know they were interacting with the Olmec at this time. There seems to be trade going on throughout Mesoamerica, so they're interacting with other people who like art. I think you're just looking at cultural flavor text here. Some people really get into artistic expression and others don't. And Yucatan, especially in the pre-classic, just doesn't really get into it. There are little things here and there, but they are just not an artistic group of people at that point in time.
That's really interesting.
It makes, you were talking with Chris Begley. I was listening to the Chris Begley thing, and certainly where he works in the Mosquitia, they're famous for these elaborate matates you were talking about.
Super.
We don't have anything like that. We have really dull without this.
Yeah. And El Salvador, it's basically Highland Guatemala at that time, so it's the big pot bellies and things. So these heads, you wrote about it in your chapter in the volume in Lost City Found Pyramid about how, there's this long history, people looking at them and going, oh, those look very stereotypically by like sort of racial conventions, African.
Yeah.
And the thing I found fascinating about your chapter is that you then kind of broke down the sort of historiography of this and looked at the sources and how these sources, because the title of your chapter is, if I remember correctly, in fact, I'm not really remembering correctly, I'm flipping to it, Black Olmecs and White Egyptians, how you literally found that the exact same late Victorian texts that were suffused with race, because late Victorian times were friggin' obsessed with race, are also used by people who try to argue race in Egypt, but in a like, oh, the Egyptians are white. So like there's this stuff is used for multiple different conversations. Is that correct?
Yeah, no, and I think one of the points that I hope to get across with that chapter, and I think is a good discussion point here, is that issue of race. Race is an incredibly important topic in modern America and in the modern world. But when you flip over to the academic world, especially anthropology, we don't talk about race anymore. Because from our academic perspective, we figure this out. That
biologically speaking, it's bullshit.
Right. Race is culturally constructed, not biological.
Now, what that means, that doesn't mean.
Hang on. David, can you say that again?
Yeah. The basic concept that is widely accepted in anthropology is that race is a culturally constructed concept, not fixed biology.
Thank you.
Yeah, and that doesn't mean that it doesn't affect people's lives. No. It really does. It's goddamn important, but it's a biological lie.
Right.
It's a social reality. It's a life or death social reality, but it's a biological lie.
And we've harped on that on the show before several times. I mean, we really try to drive that point home. However, ethnicity is more what we like to say nowadays.
Yeah, so, and I think this is the problem that comes through with this topic is that, the anthropologists, the archaeologists are having this sort of nuanced discussion of what, ethnic groups are moving around in different parts of the world in the ancient past and how horribly hard it is to discuss ethnicity through the archaeological record. You look at a piece of pottery and say, wow, was this a Maya person or was this an Olmec person? All I know is I've got a piece of pottery in front of me. And so the discussions on ethnicity in archaeological literature are complex, they're boring, they're dull, they don't really work, and they don't match the way people think of race in the modern world.
No, they don't. And so they just ignore us and go back to Victorian bullshit.
Right. And so, certainly, the root of this chapter is looking at, in particular, Ivan van Sertima's work, who's in his 1970s was one of the big first popularizers of Afrocentrism and popularized the notion that the Olmec colossal heads, to his perspective, looked African.
Right.
He said that his term, let me be specific. His term was they looked Negroid, which is essentially dark.
Again, an old term.
Sub-Saharan Africa.
It's one of these old terms that like we've talked about the Mu stones on here, the Niven stones, and like going through that stuff and original records, they would just throw these terms around, like that term and other terms constantly, and I think it's a little, frankly, surprising and shocking. And as you said, from an academic perspective, we're like, oh, where am I even talking about that? But then we have to sort of deal with the fact that one, people in the past did, and two, people in the present today, outside of what we do.
Well, I mean, it's not been that long ago that those terms were used, because I remember when I was taking my osteology class in college, the terms were Caucasianoid, Negroid, and Mongoloid.
Or go, I mean, they're not, and you're talking about an authoritative perspective. You go online and people. Oh, yeah.
I'm not even talking about like how people abuse those terms. I mean, that was the term that you used to determine
like in a textbook.
The race.
Yeah.
That's what you did. You were racing a skull, and you don't do that. You don't do that anymore.
They still do, actually.
But you don't use those terms.
No, the term
they don't, but they use things that are more surprising. We just purchased one of the programs that allows you to do that with craniometrics, and I'm gonna be interested in see what it uses to spit out. But yeah, no, I took osteology in, I want to say like 96, and yeah, it's same sort of thing. And then I know
those terms were in use for a good long time. It's not until recently. Well, they dropped Mongoloid first,
right,
and then they've replaced the rest of them with Africanized features and European instead of Caucasianoid.
But that's exactly. It's not quite find and replace, but it's in the vein. And I know there's a debate in biological anthropology along those lines. See, now the reason we bring this up is that so you got interested in looking at sort of the one of the ways that pseudoarchaeology kind of hits the specific place that you live, pre-classic Mesoamerica. Now, what that sort of entailed then is you kind of had to go into the past of your own profession. I mean, one of the things that's both fascinating and almost obsessively infuriating about trying to deal with this stuff is that even though people believe these things today, I mean, even though you can find people believe all these things today, to understand them, you have to go back. You have to go back to the past. You have to go back to sort of where things come from. And so you've started doing a bit of that.
Well, sorry, guys. Let's take a break real quick. And when we come back, we'll cover that topic.
Yeah.
The CRM Archaeology podcast brings together a panel of cultural resource management professionals to discuss the issues that really matter to the profession. Find out about networking strategies, job hunting, graduate programs, and much more. We'll often feature interviews with college professors, CRM business owners, and experts as well. Check out the show on iTunes, Stitcher Radio, and at www.archaeologypodcastnetwork.com/CRM Arc Podcast. Let's get back to the show.
When you protect your corn and soy crops with Miravis Neem fungicide, you'll start seeing a lot more than just cleaner and greener fields. You'll get longer-lasting disease control, better plant health benefits, less plant stress, higher potential yield, and increased ROI potential. Ask your Syngenta retailer about Miravis Neo and start seeing more green in your fields, on your yield monitor, and in your wallet. Always read and follow label instructions.
Hey everyone, and we are back, and we are still talking with David Anderson, and Jeb kindly suggested that we discuss something really interesting to me, because I only recently became aware of it, and that's this Masonic hubbub that's been going around lately. And I directly blame America Unearthed for this, because they've gone out of their way to dig this up. But tell me more.
Yeah, David's been working on this angle, because frankly, if you go into the esoteric before about 1930, you kind of inevitably, I mean, some of the stuff I was reading for the Moo stuff, I was like, this is Masonic. And so David's been kind of, once he realized that was important to his understanding of the Olmec and the Egyptian and all these other things, not from a scientific perspective, but how people saw it and how they do see it today, he has been sort of doing archaeology of the sort of ideas about the past, and he's been following this kind of Masonic thread. And you've presented on this. So what have you been finding?
Well, I think the general context for me in this is that my approach to pseudoarchaeology at this point has been, it's like people don't fall for this stuff, just because they're not smart, because they're not critical thinkers. I think more and more they are interested in these claims because it matches what they expect the past to look like. And I think that is from these broader societal influences.
Deeper cultural traditions
that have influenced the way we view the world. And the Masons have been an interesting struggle for me. Like, this is still something I'm trying to learn a lot about. And it's really funny, when I first, a couple of years ago, started trying to learn more about the Masons, I'm an academic. What do? I go looking for books. And it's funny because even the really serious good books about Masons are, carry names like, the secret mysteries of the hidden Masonic cult.
That seems a good thing to me.
Yeah, well, it's really hard to tell the difference between a good book about the Masons and a book about the Masons that's just sort of totally off on conspiracy theories. And the more I got to know about this, it was really sort of interesting because Masons themselves seem to take great delight in not having absolute knowledge of their own order's history. And what I mean by that is, there's some fixed points in history when in the 1700s, when the Great Lodge was founded in London and the official Freemasons were founded, and you have litanies of papers that come out of, from lodges from then on out about meetings and everything else that they hold.
A historical record.
And they love their historical record as much as it's also sort of quasi-secret and membership isn't officially admitted and whatnot. But everything before that, everything before the official founding of the lodge in London is legendary. And, when I was first trying to learn about the Masons, I missed the point. I kept saying, okay, well, what's the real history? What's the real background of this organization before it came out in the public eye?
We're archaeologists. We deal with the material world. That's our immediate go-to. And I will say it is hard to get over. But once you do, you kind of do go through, you are through the looking glass.
Yeah.
I kind of see what David's saying here, though.
Yeah. Yeah, no, I agree. I'm agreeing is what I'm saying.
Yeah, and it's fantastic because you'll pick up a good Masonic history book and they will offer 4, 5, 6 different oratories for how the order came together. And that's deliberate. They want it that way.
If I have to have a past, I prefer it to be multiple choice. And I'll let our fans catch that one.
And it's a really interesting influence on, because the Masons, conspiracy theories or not, you just have to play it out and admit they have had lots of wealthy members who have been influential members of American society. We have numerous presidents who are officially, outed as Masons, lots of wealthy businessmen. These are people who have had a huge influence on our own society, and that trickles down, not to get too Reaganomics on us here, but those big cultural figures have an effect on the way we view the world. And the Masons, you can hardly go into, my little town of Roanoke here has multiple Masonic lodges. You can hardly go into a town that doesn't have a Masons lodge these days in the United States.
Don't say anything that's going to get you killed, David. Just.
Oh no, I'm trying not to. I love the Masons. In fact, I'd really like to join, but they won't let me because I am an atheist. I apologize, but they won't. They're very open-minded on religion in most respects. They do not ask that you have a particular faith, but they ask that you have faith. And so I've had many good conversations with a friend of mine who is a Mason, and he's tempted to let me slide in anyway, but I don't think it's right because I don't have that kind of religious faith.
I actually know a couple friends who are Masons and are also atheists, and it's the workaround that they have is actually. It's very doable and it does fit within their framework very well, or else they wouldn't have done it. So I think if that's what's holding, here I'm being an advocate for joining the Masons because I think it's cool. I would love to be a Mason, but there's only a few lodges that'll even accept women. And none of them are near me.
Yeah. It was suggested to me by my insider that, when I was asked if I believed in a higher power, I could whisper my wife under my breath if I liked.
I think that's how they worked around it. And I think one of them actually is a Church of the Flying Spaghetti Monster guy. So
there you go.
So you can get around it. I'm just saying.
Yeah.
I don't know if Cthulhu would count, given that
I will bet you money that there's got to be at least one Mason who has.
Yeah, but it's technically
invoked.
Yeah, but that's technically lower. It's at least 5,000 to 6,000 meters below the surface of the Pacific. So I don't think that counts. So now, but why is
greater power, not higher or lower?
That's true. Just a power more powerful than you.
Well, that would also be my chair, but which I would list. So how does this tie into pseudo-archaeology? How does the Masonic stuff tie in? I'm not saying it does, but how does it?
this certainly is they lay a groundwork, for an understanding of the ancient world as mysterious. The Masons themselves, who are so prevalent throughout the United States, they themselves embrace a notion that our knowledge of the past is flexible and different and changing. And that lays a groundwork for a notion that our understanding of the past elsewhere should be flexible and not fixed. And archaeologists come along and say it's this way, X, Y, and Z. We found it, done, we're good. And that doesn't jibe well with the way the general public wants to view the past. And this gets a little, I drift over into a little bit of some of the territory that Jeb has been working on, I know, in his own work, where we start in the early days of archaeology. We have some archaeologists, some people stepping out and doing archaeological work, or at least writing about it, and who are also Masons, or who might be Masons, or are dragging in that legendary past. And the most famous for me, and where I want to start with this in my own work, is good old Ignatius Donnelly himself.
Oh, really? Well, that's not unsurprising.
Now, for our listeners, Ken and Sarah have done an entire episode on Atlantis, and
we have talked about Donnelly so much.
Yeah, Donnelly has done a number of different things, but he's most famous for creating sort of, in his book Atlantis, the antediluvian world, the sort of modern concept of a hyperdiffusionary Atlantis. And there's tons of masonry in there, and having read a number of other things to sort of follow on, there is as well. Now, David, you mentioned the 18th century a lot. Is that when a lot of this Masonic stuff gets kind of laid down?
The order itself was founded in the 18th century, but I think it's more of especially in the United States, it's more of a 19th century phenomenon. Okay,
so the reason I ask, and this gets back to your Egypt stuff and other things, is that seems to jibe really well. So the 18th century, and this gets into Durkheim with social structure and things. There's a lot of importance as there starts to be cracks in the facade of the church as a major kind of social organization in Europe and America in the 18th century, as the Enlightenment begins to take hold. These social groups, and they later become things like the Elks Club. But the Masons are an early version of that. And I think that's why they're really important. This is happening at the same time that there is this belief, and this can get back to in your chapter, that Egypt is kind of the heart of civilization, and that hieroglyphs are quite literally sacred signs. And there's this kind of fetishization of ideas of the classical world, and that's very much what the Greeks thought. Is that tying into what you're working with?
Yes, absolutely. Broadly speaking, this nebulous legendary past that the Masons embrace suggests that the order can trace itself back to the Middle East, back to ancient Greece, back to the Middle East, and back to Egypt. And they love that. The word fetishization, which I can pronounce very well, thank you, is perfect. The Masons are in love with sort of classical symbolism, and even more so this Egyptian symbolism. And they incorporate all of these symbols into their practices as Masons. Yeah. Again, there's sort of disputes over what Masons think any of these symbols actually mean, and how much their meanings match the ancient meanings and whatnot. But regardless, they love this ancient symbolism. And what Ignatius Donnelly does in particular with his book on Atlantis, is he takes this Masonic legendary past that traces to ancient Greece and then to ancient Egypt, and he takes it one step further. Instead of saying it came from ancient Egypt, Donnelly literally says Masonic practices came from Atlantis. And then Atlantis to Egypt to Greece to Europe.
It's like finding sort of the ultimate, and I've written about it this way, the ultimate form of kind of like proto-history. Like, what's the oldest you can trace back the idea, even if it's not what we would consider real, of a historical record. So what you're saying, it sounds like, is that a lot of these ideas about the past are not representations of the past of, say, 5000 BCE. They're representations of 1750 to 1880 CE.
Right. It's like our view of what the past should look like is constructed in the present.
Yeah, but in the very recent, almost present.
The recent present, certainly.
I think that's a very profound statement that you just made there. I like the concept being brought up that this is what they expected the past to look like. Therefore, they made their history look like that. I think that's a really important point for people to take away from this particular interview, because I think that statement kind of encapsulates why so much of the fringe gets stuck on the weird, the seemingly weird ideas that they get stuck on.
Yeah. Yeah. Now, is there a time when these ideas are still in like sort of the basic Masonic history. Is there a time that they generally start to go, well, these are in our past, but we don't really care about them as much? Like, is there sort of almost like a secularization or almost a reforming? Or are these still quite active, these ideas in like sort of Masonic like charter myths?
They are withdrawn from. They seem to be, the best of my understanding, most Masons don't engage with these ideas in the ways that they were engaged with in the 19th century. Donnelly is far from alone in the 19th century. We have Augustus Laplanchon. We have Manly P. Hall writing in the early 20th century. We have several people who are Masons in the late 19th century, early 20th century, who directly engage with what I today would call pseudo-archaeology.
Let's talk about those two. I mean, so Laplanchon, we've talked about previously in the episode where I was a guest on the Mu stones, because the Laplanchons are heavily involved in sort of the legend or the myth of Mu, if you want to put it that way. We have not talked about Manly P. Hall. Can you talk about either of those?
Yeah, I like Laplanchon for the basic point that Donnelly
and they worked in the same region where you worked.
Yeah, well, and Laplanchon has his mark in what for lack of a better term, legitimate archaeology, and then he found the first Chacmool statue. If you're familiar with the Chacmools
at Chichen Itza.
Chichen Itza, that many that were carved there of a man sort of doing a sit-up,
a reclining figure.
And they're also found in Tula and then up in the Aztec capital as well. So he found the very first one, and he named it Chacmool.
There's one at Tazamal, by the way.
Okay, excellent. But Laplanchon, Donnelly says, okay, Masonic practices began in Atlantis. Laplanchon says, oh, no. Masonic practices began in Mu. And then, as Mu fell, what is it, a princess, a queen? I have to reread my
Well, it's Princess Mu. It's Princess Mu.
Princess Mu.
Yeah, the word Mu comes from Brasseur de Bourbourg reading badly the Dresden Codex. And then Laplanchon creates Prince Ko and Princess Mu. And they are the Alice and Augustus are the reincarnations of them.
Nice. Well, of course they are.
According to Laplanchon, Princess Mu flees the destruction of Mu, carrying with her these Masonic practices
builds the Sphinx and becomes Isis, the goddess.
Oh, you're skipping. You're going too fast.
Well, yeah, I do.
Okay, so what happens after she leaves Mu?
The Maya world, where she stays at Chichen Itza.
Oh, yes,
and then is chased out of there and goes to Atlantis. And then when Atlantis falls, she goes to Egypt.
That is correct.
Now,
that is correct.
What's chasing her, just out of curiosity?
Oh, fate. Yeah, she is ill-fated, essentially, in all of this.
Yeah, and there's like enemies, and so like Mu starts as this sort of name for this, and
is she considered to be immortal?
This all happens pretty quickly, as I recall.
Yeah.
Poor woman.
The thing you got to remember, and we talked about this a little, but like a bunch of the Maya archaeologists in the late 19th century believed in this stuff. Like Edward Thompson and Sylvanus Morley, they're writing papers about Atlantis, and so it's not that far off what Laplanchon's actually doing.
All right, now who is the last guy?
Which one?
Hall is an interesting transferal figure. Laplanchon is great because he actually went out and dug stuff up, and he was deliberately, and we know he was a Mason. And he was adding to that sort of Masonic lore. Manly P. Hall is someone who comes along and bursts onto more of the esoteric scene.
And like in the 30s and 40s, is that correct? Or is that
his book is published in the 20s.
Okay.
Right?
Okay.
The Secret Teaching of All Ages.
Ah, yes.
This is a book that he is a Scottish Mason, and he reaches sort of the upper levels of Masonic lore. And he is attempting in the Secret Teachings of All Ages to trace the origins of Masonic practices, or that's one of the big things. And he very much interlaces and overlaps these ideas with other esoteric religious beliefs. And the Secret Teaching of All Ages is one of these massive tomes of a book, and he just tries to cough up everything he's read in the library about the ancient world and to pull all these sort of what he perceives to be threads of similarity from different groups throughout the world. And he works under a fundamental principle that if there are similarities in ancient groups, it must be because of a shared diffusionism.
Well,
that
of course.
It all must have sort of this original source to it. And he interweaves this narrative with saying this is related to Masons, saying this is related to an esoteric truth, and argues, ultimately that it can still be found in the world today through sort of living esoteric religious groups and through living Masonic practices. But, this involves a lot of things. Like he spends a lot of time talking about Atlantis. And, from that archaeological perspective, it's pretty easy to say, physically speaking, that Atlantis didn't exist. And he spends a lot of time arguing that the Great Pyramids are thousands of years older than we know they are. And so there's a lot of bones to pick in this book, sort of showing where things weren't really, I would say, weren't what he thought they were.
Now, you're mentioning a book, and you said that's in the 20s. He did a lot of radio presentations, right?
Oh, yes. And he founded his own institute, and he wrote many more books, and he gave lectures all over. And he was giving lectures until he passed away. Just, when I was at the Theosophical Society earlier this summer, he came up a lot. And he was giving lectures right up until the time he died about 10, 15 years ago.
Oh, really? That late? Because I've heard a bunch of them on YouTube. Like if you go to YouTube, you find a lot of Manly P. Hall lectures. And that's why I was asking.
And he is a highly beloved figure in the modern esoteric religious world.
No, I've run into that as well. Is he a contemporary of Edgar Cayce? Because it sounds a hell of a lot like Edgar Cayce.
Yes, he is 100% a contemporary.
So it's very similar.
I don't think I'm not familiar with overlap in their work. I'm not sure if they interacted, but they are absolutely writing and working at the same time.
Well,
and speaking to similar audiences.
Similar audiences, Atlantis, Egypt being older, because a lot of the people that want to make Egypt, like the Plateau of Giza, older are also working with Cayce. All right. Now, you mentioned the Theosophical meetings. I think we're going to go to break right now, but when you come back, this has all been nice and theoretical, but you took this out into the field and you did a little bit of ethnography. So we'll talk about that when we come back from break.
Stay cool and choose from over 40 in-stock ceiling fans for under $100, plus an 11% rebate at Menards. We carry the largest selection of in-stock Hunter ceiling fans, available in a variety of designs, finishes, and features. Create the perfect look and lighting for any room with a new Hunter ceiling fan. Visit Menards.com and view our entire selection of Hunter ceiling fans, plus the weekly flyer and other great deals going on now.
Save big money at Menards.
Hi everyone, and we are back. And David, you were telling us about a Theosophy Society meeting that you went to earlier this year?
Yes. So the archaeological research I did this summer was to go to the Theosophical Society of America's annual conference at their sort of main facility in Wheaton, Illinois, sort of the good suburbs of Chicago.
Now, can you tell us who they are?
What's
the significance of it all?
All right, so the group themselves, this is an esoterical spiritual group that was founded in the 1870s by a woman named Helena Blavatsky. And Blavatsky is an amazing character. In fact, the theme of the conference this summer was about Blavatsky herself, and so it was a very academic style conference. The speakers were all mostly speaking to sort of who she was and what she did, and essentially she was a woman of Russian descent. She was married. Before she gets married, she was, born into a family of relative, as I understand it, it's nobility, but sort of at the fringes of nobility. You got money, but you're not going to inherit anything, essentially. And she was married as a relatively young woman at 18 to an older, other noble figure who she really didn't want to be married to whatsoever. And so, apparently she just sort of lit out and left him very quickly. Found herself in Istanbul or Constantinople or whatever it was at the time, and just never looked back, and sort of traveled the world, and particularly went out to the east, and eventually made her way to the Americas, to North America in particular.
Yeah, she goes to London for a bit, but then a lot of the stuff she does is in New York after, and this gets sketchy as to what exactly she did in India, but after some time in India.
Yeah, and it's in London that she says that she met one of the Mahatmas, or that she saw him, but only began to correspond with them later, and didn't realize who he was at the time. And essentially, this is a woman in 1870. She found, or not in the 1870s, she founds the Theosophical Society, and the group is it's a group that is dedicated to studying esoteric spiritual traditions from around the world. Yeah. And in a broad sense, this is a group that defines itself as not being a religion, but is very interested in what other religions have seen and said and done. And I think broadly speaking, they feel that most religions have seen aspects of the truth, but have not sort of fully grasped the entirety of that truth. And
yeah, the way I explain it in class is this is kind of growing up alongside anthropology in the late 19th century, and a lot of early anthropologists were theosophists, including the first director of the Middle American Research Institute. And anthropologists were very interested in a comparative study of religion from a scientific perspective. Theosophists were very interested in a comparative study of religion to create a new way of thinking.
Yes, basically, for them, they're looking for, much like Manly P. Hall was looking for, any similarities he saw between cultures must have sort of a common root. The Theosophical Society, in a lot of ways, like many people, the Theosophical Society becomes, in some ways, a root to the coming development of New Age spiritualism.
Yeah, I would call it Victorian New Age.
Yeah, it predates sort of the origins of that term, but and there's a desire here to discover universal religion, discover sort of a universal truth. And the Theosophical Society becomes extremely interested in the ancient world, Egypt, of course, and certainly there are discussions of Atlantis that come into play here as well.
I mean, the Blavatsky's first book is Isis Unveiled, again, the goddess of magic in Egypt.
Yes. And there's a thought process here that essentially, if you can get back to more ancient religions, that they will be purer, that they will be closer to that truth, to that original universal religion before it had been sort of corrupted. And so they began to borrow from a lot of religious traditions around the world, looking for that universal religion, looking for that universal truth, essentially.
Now, this doesn't sound that bad, though.
No, and it was a wonderful experience going and working with these people. But it's one of these things, and this is where, as I said, my desire here is to not walk onto the pseudo-archaeological stage and say, everyone who likes ancient aliens is an idiot because they don't debunk this stuff. My desire is to come onto this stage and say, why do people so readily expect the ancient world to look like this? And I think the Theosophical Society is a root movement here to looking at the ancient world as profoundly mystical, as profoundly esoteric, as profoundly spiritual, and profoundly powerful. And this doubles down, I think, on that legendary aspect of that we see in the Masons. And it introduces a notion, I think the average American has not heard of the Theosophical Society, but I would strongly argue that they have been influenced by it.
They've heard its products. I mean, we've go ahead.
The big question I have actually right now that I need to do more research on is good old Mr. Stan Lee, and exactly where Stan Lee got all of his ideas from.
It's not Stan Lee. It's Jack Kirby.
Oh, okay, stop! You really are talking about comic people.
Yeah, we're talking about comic people now.
Okay, what is Stan? Okay, no wait. What is Stan Lee's connection to the Theosophy Society?
Let me just make this very simple. This coming November, if you go and watch the Doctor Strange movie when it comes out,
oh yeah,
that is a fictionalized version of
that's Ditko. That's also Ditko. Yeah,
that's a fictionalized Theosophy Society.
Just about. There are extraordinary overlaps in terms
of the idea of a Westerner going to the East and learning all their secrets in order to bend reality. That's straight up.
Yeah, but he's learning it from a white Celtic woman.
Well,
that's being made today. But exactly.
Let's get back to the Oscars so white controversy.
Right, and that's why, because traditionally that character is not white, and traditionally that character is the unscrutable Orient. But no, that Jack Kirby, and I know you taught, and so now we're going to get behind. We're just going to go fast now. You taught out of Creepball in one of your classes recently, and he's all about Jack Kirby, and he's not wrong in that sense, who was just dipping left and right and taking and created so many of the things like Darkseid and all these characters we see in comics today, was reading Von Daniken, was reading Morning of the Magicians, was reading the Theosophy stuff and turning it into comic books.
Absolutely.
Well, it seems like fertile ground, so why wouldn't you?
Well, Lovecraft, who we're going to talk about in the near future, did the exact same thing. He openly calls out the Theosophists. He basically says in the Call of Cthulhu, the Theosophists are almost right, but they're really optimistic. He literally says that. That's not a joke.
So, David, you oh, sorry, Jeb.
No, that's it.
David, you've taught Theosophy and comic books?
To a certain extent. I started last semester and will be teaching again this semester a class called Paranormal America.
Ooh, I like it.
It's a class at Roanoke College in their from the sociology department. And broadly speaking, it is an overview of what the state of paranormal belief in modern America is.
Yeah, it's a lot of the stuff we talk about on here, and he's been reading books by, I can't remember Creepball's first name, but who's written a lot about sort of pop culture and media and deeper stuff and magic, and he's written about Jack Kirby, who was a major creator for comics in the 1960s and 70s and was deeply dipping into this well.
Yeah, we actually used Kripal's book, Authors of the Impossible, which is a great book to read. I would highly recommend it if you're interested in the paranormal world. It is not an easy read. It is extraordinarily dense, and it was a bit much for some of the students, and so I had to drop it for this semester. But it is a great book. It is profoundly thought-provoking for me, and a little disturbing at moments too, but a fun way to sort of approach these things.
So, David, let's bring things back around to the Theosophy Society meeting that you went to. Can you share a couple stories of what you encountered when you got there and how that met or did not meet your expectations?
Yeah, it was, it was funny. I was asked this question a lot while I was there, actually, sort of the expectations question. And, to be honest, I didn't know what to expect really walking in. And so it was an interesting experience. It was... people there are extraordinarily nice. I was very well welcomed there. And, what I walked in and said to them, when anyone asked why I was there, I was, always trying to be very open and honest. And I think, and one of the reasons I'm very happy to do this show too, I think, and what I told them and what I tell other people too, I think our discipline, I think the discipline of archaeology, that archaeologists tend to be very bad about talking to the public. Mm-hmm. Like I think I said towards the beginning of this interview, students get really bored when I want to talk about, pre-classic Maya socio-political organization. And we have this tendency as professionals to when someone asks us, oh, what's amazing about archaeology? Why, what are you studying? Oh, it's so amazing. It's so cool that you do archaeology. I say, yes, it is. Let me tell you about the state of political organization at Shkobo in pre-classic Maya, 500 BC.
Let's start talking about irrigation.
Like, wait, no, what? I thought the ancient past was powerful and amazing and legendary and mystical. And I'm like, no, we have pottery.
We have pottery.
And so, when I was there, what I would say to people is that, look, I think archaeologists are very bad at talking to a general public about archaeology. And the reason I went and the Theosophical Society is, very absolutely, it is a group that is extraordinarily interested in the ancient world. And I, as an archaeologist, want to be able to be better at talking to groups of people like them too. And to be able, ultimately, I think the highest goal that we can have at this point, as archaeologists, is to protect archaeological heritage, to make people aware that this stuff is important, that it shouldn't be bulldozed over or tossed aside, that if you see an arrowhead in the field, that maybe it's not a good idea to just pick it up and bring it home, that maybe there's a good idea to tell somebody about it instead.
Take a picture.
Take a picture and explain, and get people involved who can understand the context and how important that context is. And so this is, the general public views archaeology, I would say, in a very different way than we do. And so this is, going to the Theosophical Society was a big part of how I want to try and understand that perspective better so that we can be better at that heritage preservation aspect.
Now, they're very interested in the past, but are they interested in anything that you or us have to say?
Yes, absolutely. Everyone that I spoke to while I was there, instantly wanted to know about things that I do. And the things that archaeologists do are eagerly consumed by popular audiences. We just don't really reach out to them all that often. So it takes a dedicated version of those audiences to find it. And so this is perhaps not entirely the answer to the question you're asking, but I can't help but remember there was a man who was at the conference this summer who I never got to talk to. I kept trying to get over to talk to him and didn't quite get there. But every day he was wearing a tie that had an Egyptology scene on it.
Oh, how cool.
They were New Kingdom tomb paintings, essentially, on his ties. So these are folks who are extraordinarily interested in what's going on in archaeological studies, but they interpret it in a very different way than we do, and because they're coming at it from a very different perspective than we are.
Now this doesn't sound particularly fringy to me, though. It's not like tales I've heard of UFO conventions or the creationist conventions I've been to, which friendly people all around, but there was a conflict of realities at both of those. Did you have a similar experience here?
There is a general thread. I mean, it was surrounding particularly the theme of Atlantis.
Gotcha.
Because for Blavatsky, the founder of this organization, in her book, The Secret Doctrine in particular, she elaborates on how humanity has gone through what she calls different races.
Yeah, root races.
Root races. And we are the fifth root race of humanity. And this is more like stages than what we would think of as the modern concept of race that we were talking about earlier. And so we are the fifth race of humanity. And the fourth race occurred in Atlantis.
And there was also Lemuria. So this whole sunken continent, because it's the geology of the late 19th century.
Gotcha.
Yeah.
So they're treating Lemuria and Atlantis as if they're two different places.
Yeah. Oh, yeah. And so this is so the idea and the notion of Atlantis is profoundly influential and a big part of what they talk about. And it came up repeatedly while I was there. And I had many interesting conversations. And I would say opinions within the society vary. I talked to some people who were very committed to the notion of a physical, real Atlantis. One of the speakers who presented, and some of the folks I talked to as well, was less interested in whether Atlantis was a physical place and was more interested in it as a mythological place. And he meant that in a way that in a way that myth can be more powerful than reality.
In sort of a metaphorical, but not necessarily purely metaphorical sense.
Yeah. And so the opinions on Atlantis vary greatly there, but it is something that's extremely important to them. There's some popularity. This is a group that, so the core doctrine, is not sort of this massively fringe, oh my God, they're spouting sort of crazy things. No, like a lot of the things that, almost everything people are saying there, I think is great. I have no particular problem with. But there's so many sort of interesting overlaps. I had some conversations about Osmanagic's ideas about the Bosnian pyramid. This is a group
which we've also had a show on.
Yes.
Yeah, this is a group that wants a spiritual, mystical, strange, ancient world.
Yeah.
And so they are interested in when other people propose those ideas.
And I've talked about this a little on the show, and I think we're going to talk about it again in the future. That honestly, I think that's how a lot of people see the past.
Yeah.
And I think that is possibly one of the biggest hurdles for professional archaeologists to get over, is that is how people see the past. And you know what? We can actually be scientific and talk about it in that way, but that's not easy. And that's not something we're going to unpick here. So you went to the Theosophical meetings, and you had some good relations, and you got some sort of different perspectives and all that. Are you kind of working this up into other material? I mean, this sounds like this is something that is a work in progress.
Yeah, this is a work in progress for me, and I'm currently starting to work on a book manuscript, sort of tying all of this together. Broadly speaking, looking at how the public perception of the ancient world or the public perception of archaeology has been constructed over the years. That, again, why do the students walk into our classes and, want to talk about these weird things and don't, and expect the ancient world to look this way? And so that's the overarching project here. Is I'm starting to work on this book. Hopefully it'll be called Weirding Archaeology, if I get my way. And looking at how this story of the public perception of archaeology has been built.
I like it.
Yeah.
I should give props and credit here, because I love this use of the term weirding, and I'm actually borrowing it from a book called Weirding the War, which is about the Civil War. Strange enough place for me to draw my influences from. But if you're looking for Civil War books as well, Weirding the War is a fantastic edited volume about how, actually the Civil War really kind of sucked. There were some horrible things going on, and maybe we shouldn't glorify it quite so much.
I thought you were going straight up Frank Herbert's Dune.
Oh no! I'm thinking about incorporating that as the weirding word as something else for the end, maybe. But
the animated version of your book. I don't even know what that's going to look like. Actually, I can now instantly recognize what that's going to look like. So
I like that we've already animated your book that hasn't been written yet.
Oh yeah. I have an artist picked out to commission the cover, but I'm not sure if she's
there you go. No, and I mean, obviously, I've been recently working on this whole spooky archaeology thing, and I have something that's under review right now for that, and I think that's a major part of our past, because I really do think that people see antiquity and that concept of antiquity in this sense. Now, you're teaching about this. And you're going to be talking about this in the future. Do you see you're going to be doing more ethnography, or what are some of sort of the research avenues you see going here as you kind of like work on this project?
I need to continue to work on writing up what I dealt with this summer. But yeah, right now this is more of an ethnographic style project than an excavation project. And I want to talk to people about how they view the ancient world. I've got an interview lined up with this artist named Starroot, who incorporates UFOs and Maya symbols into her art.
Oh shit! So, that's you just tripped about 5 different trips for me. So now, if you could excavate Atlantis, that would be absolutely fantastic. And
I'm signing up for that.
Yeah, but David, I think this has been fantastic. And you're hitting some things. I don't know if there's been a really good accounting of sort of Masonic influences on pseudo-archaeology, and I would love to see that sort of explicated further. So as this research goes, I think we should definitely have you back.
Definitely,
and,
yes.
And again, the sort of the bits on Olmec and Egypt, which ties into this Hermetic stuff and ties into this Masonic stuff, can be found. And I don't want to promote this too much because I'm terrible at it, but our Lost City Found Pyramid that you co-edited with me. Mm-hmm. So thank you very much for talking about this stuff.
Thank you guys for having me on. It's been a pleasure.
No problem. Thank you, David. Thank you, Jeb.
All right. We'll talk to you all about something weird next time.
Trials as one will call. No, we don't do dinosaurs.
Thanks for listening. We hope you've enjoyed it. Our music was provided by Archaeosuit Productions. If you like what you've heard, please subscribe and rate us on iTunes or Stitcher and share us wherever you use social media. You can contact us with your questions, comments, or angry email at archifantasies@gmail.com. You can follow the podcast at www.archaeologypodcastnetwork.com/archifantasies. You can follow the blog at www.archifantasies.com and get updates on Tumblr and Twitter at Archaeofantasies. You can also look for us on Facebook. If you're looking for the show notes for this episode, go to the podcast website at www.archaeologypodcastnetwork.com/archaeofantasies. Thanks again for listening.
No, we don't do dinosaurs. No, we don't do dinosaurs. We don't do dinosaurs.
This show is produced by Chris Webster and Tristan Boyle and was edited by Chris Webster.
This has been a presentation of the Archaeology Podcast Network. Visit us on the web for show notes and other podcasts at www.archaeologypodcastnetwork.com. Contact us at chris@archaeologypodcastnetwork.com.
Save on O'Reilly Brake Parts Cleaner. Get 2 cans of O'Reilly Brake Parts Cleaner for just $8. Valid in-store only at O'Reilly Auto Parts.
O'Reilly Auto Parts.
Stay cool and choose from over 40 in-stock ceiling fans for under $100, plus an 11% rebate at Menards. We carry the largest selection of in-stock Hunter ceiling fans, available in a variety of designs, finishes, and features. Create the perfect look and lighting for any room with a new Hunter ceiling fan. Visit Menards.com and view our entire selection of Hunter ceiling fans, plus the weekly flyer and other great deals going on now.
Save big